How do leaders turn chaos into clarity? Pat Alacqua shares his 3 C's system for confident, accountable, empowered leadership. This is the conversation you don't want to miss.
Welcome to the next interview show. I'm Doland White, and as the announcer mentioned, as we came through that front door, I'm the host of the podcast, and I'm blessed. I say this at the beginning of every podcast. I'm blessed because I get to have great conversations, and today we're going to have a great conversation with Pat Alacqua, and we're going to talk about leadership, the 3 C's. I love the rules of threes, by the way. All the time I tell my clients, don't give me any more than 3 because I'm 72 and I won't remember it. But talk about the 3 C's. We're going to talk about business, your journey, and before we kind of get going, I always start with gratitude. There's 1,000 other places you could be, and other people you could be hanging out with for the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, and you're going to hang out with me to help empower some leaders. So I just want to tell you, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here and the insights you're going to share. So thanks, dude, for coming and hanging out. So.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this, Dolan. It's, two old guys like us together having a conversation and talking about, building a business or entrepreneurship or whatever you want to call it. There's nothing more fun than that.
I know. All I need is a scotch and I'm good to go. All right. So, for the listeners that have not met you, and we'll talk a little bit about your book here in a bit, but let's just spend a couple of minutes talking. I know we were cutting up before we hit the go button here about being failed retirees. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of your journey and your experience. I know you built businesses and sold businesses, and just kind of what brought you here today, and then we'll get into it. So.
Okay. Well, great. I appreciate giving me the opportunity to just give some quick background. I'll try to keep it short. I'm told when somebody gives me the chalkboard or something, it's like, it's hell. So, but I promise I'll keep this short. I guess the best way for me to summarize it, I guess, is, I grew up. I'll go back to the beginning, but trust me, I'm not going to go through my whole childhood, right? But I think it applies to our conversation. I grew up around small businesses, and my grandfather, had a little grocery store on the East Coast, in a small blue collar town in New Jersey, South Jersey, not too far from Philadelphia. Yeah. And my dad worked there, my mom helped out. And, during the summers, he had this little motel in the Jersey Shore, for people familiar with that, the North Wildwood, the Wildwood area. And my mother, we went down there in the summers. So by the time I was 6th, 7th grade, I was working 60, 70 hours a week. Okay. Wow. Because, I got a job when I was down there, and, my family, my grandfather, they were making a living. These weren't big businesses, right? The supermarkets ultimately put him out of business for his, small town grocery store. But,
sure,
through that process, I started working at an early age, and loved it. And I think, during those periods of time, I think, it started getting me focused on how businesses work. And of course, I didn't know what I was really looking at, right? But I mean, I'd walk into t-shirt shops on the boardwalk, and I still do today. My wife hits me over the head, it's like, I wonder how that thing works, And so, I think that's where my start got, right? So, eventually of course, I got into high school. I graduated high school. I was in a hurry. I didn't go to college. I was in a hurry to get into my own business. Okay. And I started a little residential concrete business with a cousin. Okay. Oh, wow. And, and we didn't know what the heck we were doing, and, but I think without really knowing it there, I learned at that point in time what it was like, because we had an uncle. It was both our uncles. It was both our uncle was both of ours. And it wasn't his father. who was in the concrete business. He was in the union in New Jersey, and so he knew how to finish concrete, etc.
Yeah.
So he taught us some things. And of course, at that age, you just go out and you start doing it. You don't worry about what you might do wrong, right?
Right.
So,
of course.
So in that, at that point in time, I think I started learning what it was like to talk to people that had been where you're trying to go, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And he got us through that. And ultimately, I had an opportunity then to get into fast forwarding. Did that for a few years. Had an opportunity to get into the trade show industry. And I said to my cousin, okay, the truck we bought, it's yours, et cetera, because instinctively, I just thought, there's a different path for me, right? So I started my trade show business with two great partners and a lot of great people, and we really disrupted that industry. And I only say that to say at that time, we went through so much growth and learning. Okay. Cause to go through that. All right.
Yeah.
So many different phases of growth, as you know, from your experience, Nolan.
Sure.
And right. So in that process, I mean, we repositioned it. We changed the name. We grew it into an international company. And again, I only say that because our success brought growing pains and challenges, right?
Right.
Which is what growth does. So I learned a lot through that, fortunate enough to sell it, and get, and put a great management team in. And I think they're on their 5th or 6th or PE group now after the one that bought us. So I'm really proud of the foundation that we put in as entrepreneurs, right? And there's still a very strong company in that industry. So I'm proud of that, proud of the people. It wasn't us, as you know. It was we just had some really great people. So I got out of that, and I'm sitting with my wife and saying, I don't know that I'm done, And so I went out quickly and bought this sports academy in the youth sports space, and it was a turnaround.
Yeah.
Be careful. Because it's like the old stories. I always wanted the keys to my own gym. Be careful what you ask for. You just might get it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, and that was at a time where all these youth sports academies hadn't figured out the model yet. So we went in, we turned it around. It was successful. We built a national brand around that. And there's a small business in the metro Atlanta area. Okay. But learned a lot through that. So I say all that to then lead up to my story of where I am today, right? Yeah, and then I'll come up for air, Dolan. Where I really got it that, there's business is different, every type of business, right? But so much of it's the same, right? When you're really working on the business versus in it, right?
Yeah.
So in that, I said, you know what? I'm going to, I'm not ready to retire. Okay. And I'm failing at that. And we talked about that earlier.
Yes, we did.
So I want to change my definition of success. So how do I help others now do what I've done and what my uncle started, following my family started in the early goings? How can I take myself and other people that have helped me on my journey at different times, and how can I help others on their journey? So today I take that experience and I try to work with leadership teams who are, they hit those growing pains, and they're not growing pains from failure most times. They're growing pains from success, as you well know.
Oh yeah.
And how do I help them reduce their learning curve and move from A to B faster in their approach to scaling their businesses? So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I'll come up for air.
That's a good story. Yeah. No, you know what though? I think that's really important. I think the one of the lessons I learned stepping out and saying, I'm retired. My kids bought me a barbecue and apron. I love to grill, so they bought me a grill that says retired. I do what the hell I want when I want to do it, kind of thing. It says at the very bottom of it. And so far, I'm not doing really well at it. My wife reminds me every now and then, you're retired, right? You're supposed to be retired. But it's interesting. So a couple things I want to kind of go back to that. I love that story, especially because I grew up around construction myself too, and so slinging a hammer and kind of going, this, I really don't want this to be my vocation for the rest of my life. I'm going to do some other stuff. I'm going to go over there. I made a couple of notes kind of as you were going through it. I want to start with maybe just a little bit of a conversation. You talk about 5 phases of a business a little bit. And let's kind of talk about there, because I think in each of the phases, and then we'll come back to, I want to talk about turnaround a little bit, and what that means. But in each of the phases, there's a different scope of circumstances and situations and things that you're looking at, right, that you lead through, right? Leadership is not, it's not, I'm starting a company and I'm going to lead every day the same way. There's seasonality involved in it, right, from a skill set. So, and since you've been there, maybe we just take a moment or two, if you don't mind, and just talk a little bit about those phases and kind of what that means and concepts of leading, kind of as you're kind of going through those steps.
Absolutely. Great question. Quick context before I get into, I think, the phases that I list in the book.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right. Is Dolan, there's every business and every product or service within a business has a life cycle, right? Yep. Right. And it goes from idea to startup to growth to what's called maturity. And then through that maturity phase, right, you either, however long that is, you have to either you reinvent and come out with the next product or service, right? Or you have to reinvent because you got a turnaround and you haven't figured out how to do that fast enough, right? In simple terms, that's sort of, there's much more to it than that, right? But that's the journey. And so many companies think that because they've had one successful product, it's like having the second or third kid, right? I got 2 kids. I thought, I'm ready for the second one. I ain't ready for the second one just because I had the first one, right? It's different, even though it's the same, right? So anyway, with that context, I think every company and every business or every product goes through that same life cycle. And I think the way I talk about the phases of that, and the phases, I'll give them in sequential terms, but as you know, they don't necessarily happen sequentially. They can, but you might be in and out of many of them, where it's like you sort of have that fit stage where it's like customer market match, right, is what I'm offering of value, and have I figured out how to articulate that in a way that differentiates me properly and enough people are going to buy, right? So there's that fit stage. And then once you get that together, the next phase is the stretch phase. Back into that growth, when we talked about the life cycles, right, where no matter how much money, people, resources you have, you're stretched because you got that market message match, right? Customer, now we're growing, right? And then all of a sudden you realize, hey, we can't scale this through the hustle. Just more, we can't scale the hustle, right? So in that, now you have to go to systems phase. Right. And every one of these, as we're talking through it, Dolan, requires a different kind of leadership, as you know. Okay. Right. Yes. So, which is where I think you were going with this. But then you get to the systems stage, and then you get to the more intentional culture stage. You're always focused on culture, but in those early phases, you're touching everything as a leader, and the culture just happens around you. But when you get through growth, now you got to be more intentional about how your culture really, how do you grow, but keep the DNA of your culture? So you got to be more intentional. And then the final phase is what I call anticipation, which is, and this is really everyone, it's like, how do you keep one foot in the present and one foot in the future? Because you got to work, you constantly got to balance that working in the business and on it, even though you're doing that through all the phases. But how do you anticipate what nobody else sees yet coming around the bend? Because growth is chaotic, and you accept that. It just is what it is. But the more you can anticipate and get ready for that next stage of growth while you're fighting the alligators that are biting your butt in the current stage, okay, you can manage some of that chaos.
Yeah.
So the phases are fit, stretch, systems, culture, and anticipation, all within those life cycle phases that I mentioned for context. Make sense?
Yeah. No, I love that. And I would, so listeners, somewhere on your phone, there's a little circle and it's got numbers and it says 3060, which is in a little rewind button. Rewind that. Go back and listen to that, because there are a couple of things that I think you really touched on there, Pat, that are really important. That is, through that arc, right? All the seasons of your business, there are those phases that occur, and you have to lead differently through those. And I think a lot of leaders get hung up on, well, I'm going to go. They lose track of the fact that they'll kind of go out and they'll find a method. They'll find a methodology. And I won't throw any methodologies on the bus. There's a bunch. There's Gino Wickman and John Maxwell and Crossing the Chasm and I'm gonna go get this. Not that I made this mistake as a CEO myself once, a couple of decades ago. But they'll go to a methodology and come back and go, boom, and I'm going to overlay it on my company. And this one methodology is going to take me through all of the things I've got to do going forward through all of those phases. And it doesn't work that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always look at it, Dolan, I always talk about two things. Number one is what got you here won't get you there. And many people use that. I don't know who I stole it from, but it applies, right?
I'm with you on that.
And if you accept that, you'll see the clues that are staring you in the face of how you might need to change.
Right.
But we all tend to take what got us here as, we always have to be thinking about, what are we going to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing? And you don't want to throw the baby out with the wash, right? So there's that piece. But then to really tie into what you're saying, there's always a science and an art to everything, right?
Oh, yeah.
Within that, right? And what you're saying is, people talk to me all the time. I go in and I'll put a management system in and I say, use any management system you want. What's most important is use it to help you think differently. Because as you go through all those phases, the most important thing is to recognize you got to think differently, plan differently, and execute differently. Yeah. And you got to figure out what to stop, start, and continue doing so you don't throw the baby out with the wash. But it's those three, and you can use any system you want. It's just, how are you going to think differently, and how are you going to apply the science to your situation, which is the art, right?
Yeah, I love that, Pat, because that's so true. It's kind of like the system's important, but it's not the show. The show is, how are you going to get up in the morning prepared to think differently and start over every day? Success starts again every day at 8 a.m. Success starts again. It is not fluid. It will change. One of my favorite quotes, and I forget, it's one of the Sharks, used to own the Mavs. And I ran into him and we were talking once, and he goes, somebody's always climbing your mountain right behind you. So how are you going to continue to think different? How do you not react, but respond? How do you get out in front of it? So one of the things that you touched, I want to go back to, Pat, and just talk a little bit about and touch on is, I take notes as you're going, believe it or not. I got a little piece of scratch paper here I scribble on as you're saying stuff. One of the things that you mentioned is, and I want to touch on this because I think as people are going through these phases, you talked about growth, because there's growth involved. To get from each phase to the next phase, there's growth. And with growth comes chaos. Right? It's a natural can be a natural outcome of growth. How do you, when you're working, with leaders and working with organizations, and even in the companies you grew, because you grew them, and congratulations, by the way, I've been there, done that too. When you grow a company to a size where it gets acquired, that's a big freaking task. That's a well worth a tip of the hat for those who've not done it. You won't understand it till you get there. But when you, because you can't. But how do you in working with your organizations, you use the word culture, and that culture is probably a part of it, but how do you manage the chaos? And I don't know that you can manage chaos, but how do you direct the chaos, I suppose?
Well, I think number of things. My mind's going like a pinball machine right now, right? As
Yes.
you can say, there's the number of things on how to answer that, right? But great question. And I think a number of ways. First of all, it is, when things are chaotic and fast and urgent, right? It's, you gotta figure out your priorities. You got to figure out what not to do versus what to do, and all those things, right? But but in the process, we all have a tendency to want to speed up, and a lot of times what we need to do is the exact opposite: slow down, okay, zoom out, right, and get perspective. And of course, that it's easy to say, right? Because sometimes you got to take a step back to take two steps forward. But number one, that's one of the things I think that's so important. And then learning how to put the systems in that help you clarify what the real issue is. Because so many of us chase symptoms, and you got to identify what the root causes are. And that's tough, because sometimes you got to let certain fires burn. Right? Because if you put the right fire out, it's going to put 10 of them out. If you put the wrong one out, the next one's just going to pop up, right? So at one level, I think that sounds so simple, but how to do that. And then there's psychological issues that I believe that I went through myself, that you got to overcome in your mindset so that you can navigate your way through that. Because somebody wants to walk in and give you a system to do that with, but you're not going to use the system because psychologically you're being driven by things that you have to look in the mirror and change about yourself.
Yeah, I love that, because it's really interesting, because I think that's one of the gaps, Pat, in implementing a system. There's a difference between having a system and just rote implementing it, but it's the people component. It's what's your mindset. It's where are your people in implementing the system. There's an equation that I use with my clients, which is a company can only attain the velocity at which its team is willing to accept change. And it's a math thing, right? Being an engineer by trade is kind of like, okay, let's just make it math and I can understand it. So, and a musician, it's a lot easier to understand stuff when you're a musician as a math guy. So it's, I like that, because I think that's one of the challenges. And I think a lot of leaders get hung up on that whole thing, Pat, around, hey, I'm going to go find this system. And by the way, there's the shiny object aspect of we've all been in masterminds together, and we've seen, companies that are way out in front of us, and they're implementing a system, and you come back and you go, wow, that's really cool. I'm going to come back. I'm going to overlay over the top. And you're not there yet.
Right. That's why years ago, and I still do, I'd buy a book. I don't always read a book, from cover to cover, right? I buy a book, I get my ideas, but then I had to go implement. So what's that though? You're taking somebody else's science. Now let me figure out how to make that work.
Right.
Because I'm really managing a change process. Whatever my problem is, it's really a change process, which is what you're alluding to, right, though?
Yeah. I love that. So one of the things that you also kind of, and this is a good time, we talked about the rule of three. I love three things, right? I want to just talk about the 3 C's for just a second, because what we just talked about, that hooks into the side F. So I would like to, at least as far as I'm into your book, I'll do a plug for the book here in a second. But just as it's easier for everybody, book's coming, hang tight, it's coming, book's coming. But I want to talk about the 3 C's, because I think that's an important aspect for us to visit, right? Because there has got to be a systematic approach, and that leads you into that. So,
yeah. Well, quick background before we jump into the 3 C's, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Because again, we talked about it. It's a system that works, and I can talk about the 3 C's, and it can address any challenge. Okay. And, but again, the reason leaders don't, in my view, do not use my 3 C system or any other system is 3 things psychologically. Okay. One, where they get their identity from, which is what I do is how I feel about myself. How do they manage control? I'm a control freak. I just learned how to manage it. I'm still a control freak, right? So how do you stay in control?
Yes.
And many of us are desire to be liked.
Yes.
So we have to manage that inner game to use any system, right? My system, right? My system works. And I'll answer your question now, but it won't work if you don't recognize how you are managing. I mean, we're not psychologists. So we don't put people on a couch, but we can all manage those things if we're at least aware that those filters are preventing us from using the systems that we have in front of us.
That's really. I'm gonna pause you there because and we'll do the 3 C's, but I love the preamble to it because I think leaders, people, we lose track of in order to make any system work. And I like the 3 C's. Happen to like the 3 C's. In order to make it work, there are those 3 prerequisites. And if we don't have a handle on them, by the way, it's a handle on all 3, not 1, not 2, all 3. You've got to do the work there. And I continue to fail at all of those periodically. There's good days and bad days because I like to control things myself. Raise my hand there. Hi, I'm Doland. I'm an ex-micromanager. So as we kind of get through that, but I think that's really important for leaders to understand is when whether it's the 3 C's we're going to talk about, and I like them. I like things that are simple, focused, not 15 things you got to go do. 3 is like the max number for people to accomplish. But master those 3 things you just talked about. If you can't do that and focus on those, then you can't get to the other side. So now let's get to the 3 C's. So good preamble.
Okay,
Thank you for that opening there.
It's the 3 C's are, now I'm missing it. Clarify, chart, co-align. Okay.
Yeah.
And in the short version of what it is, there's the system side of it, but like in any framework, and I'll say what the 3 C's are and what the system is, right?
Yeah.
Because, what I try to do is teach people how to use the system as well as I can facilitate the system for them.
Sure.
But I only say that, Dolan, to say that the real power of the system is how it is the framework that guides you to learn how to think differently within the system, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And a good framework or a good system will do that. Okay.
Yes.
So what the system is clarify what the challenge is. Okay. And there are frameworks which we don't have time to get into today, obviously.
Sure.
But on how to identify what's the real problem. Do I really want to focus on this problem? Real problem meaning symptom versus root cause. And is it worth tackling? And the same thing on the opportunity side. Is it an opportunity? What is it? Is it something we want to chase? Because sometimes saying no is more important than saying yes, as you well know, right?
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah.
So there's the part of the process that clarifies things. And then it moves you into charting your path. Now, a lot of people think I mean charting your path is an implementation plan. You get to that later. To me, what the charting the path is, or the course, is identify your non-negotiables. You're going to identify what's my desired outcome, right?
Yeah.
For the challenge as part of your clarification. But now you want to say what must happen and what cannot happen.
Right.
And I liken that to like, picture you're on a 12-lane highway, right?
Yeah.
Dolan? And there's 12 roads. Any one of those lanes are going to get you to the end. But what's the guardrails you want to put up so
Right.
that you stay within the right lanes?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how that helps with empowerment. Because how often as leaders, I remember doing it, I'd say to people, okay, here's what we're trying to do. Let's say I clarified it well. I would say, go write the implementation plan. And they'd come back and I'd say, no, that's not what I want. Or no, no, why are we doing it that way? What the hell have I just done? I just took empowerment away from them.
That's right.
I include them in those guardrails. Then I can actually say, okay, now you go do the implementation plan. You can go figure out the how to. And it's a way for me to stay in control without controlling, right? Back to our other conversation. So that chart the course phase is critical. And then the final phase, piece of it is co-align your team. Now, we all talk about alignment and how important that is, as you well know.
Right.
But getting it done and the patience to get it done is easier said than done, right?
Oh, boy.
So if you, like any good system, the 3 C's really integrate themselves. It's not one or the other. It's stacking them or integrating them as you go through. So if you bring your team together, whoever's critical to implementation, bring them in early, and whether they're part of creating the chart the course or clarity, or you just need to get their alignment before you need further, bring them in early enough, and now you've got all the thinking within those 3 pieces, and now you can say to an implementation plan, a team, now let's put the real detail together, and now you got so much of a better chance to get execution, because as you know, ideas are a dime a dozen. We all fail when it comes to execution, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that, Pat, because that there's so much depth and importance in what you were just talking about. Without bringing that team in early and involving them through that process, you're back to being a micromanager. You're back to, now you're not leading, now you're managing, right? Managing is telling people what to do and resourcing them with the stuff they need to go do it, and then hoping they get it done on time. So as you're kind of implementing in the 3 C's, and one of the things that I do want to kind of reemphasize that you talked about, which is it is not do this, do this, do this, that it all lives together, right? How do you, just as you were talking about, a question kind of popped into my head, which is when you're working with, an organization and they're implementing the 3 C's, people, it's kind of like a diet, right? Sometimes I drive through McDonald's. I shouldn't be doing that, but I'll go get, I can hear the Big Mac call my name and I'll go get it. There is that tendency for teams and organizations to fall off the wagon. And how do you help, or what kind of things do you do with the leaders to kind of help them recognize, hey, here's a symptom of what it's going to look like when you fall off of these concepts. Here's what's going to happen. Here are some things to kind of like get you focused back. It's a 9-pound question. But I'm really kind of curious just in a couple of tips, because I'm sure leaders just heard what you talked about and went, oh, shit, I could do that. I'll just do the 3 C's. But that doesn't mean you've etched them.
Right. Well, it's numbers of things. Again, my pinball machine's working again in my head. Right?
Sorry, man.
Right? No, that's wwhy I love these conversations, right? Because there's no one way of doing things, right? There just never is. But I think some of that works its way out because you get behind a lot of your whys when you're talking about what must happen and what cannot happen. And you're communicating that along the way. But what I also find is, just like, you're a teacher, and a lot of things you do, any leader has to be a good teacher, right?
Sure.
and a coach. And when people go to implement, I think one of the best things we can do is remember our journey of how we learned ourselves and what we're teaching.
Yeah.
And when they go to implement, I always say, now let's anticipate the challenge you're going to have when you go in, implement this. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
And so let's at least help them identify a couple of things they're going to face before they go.
Yeah.
And that's easier to do when everyone's being brought along, right, through the process, as I said. So in that, and then I guess the other part of it is really emphasizing with the team that says, don't try to be a perfectionist. Raising my hand, if you can see it on the camera, because I am that too, part of my control freak, right? Okay. And learn to embrace just the next couple of steps, right? Which is what's next, embrace the change, and you're always focused on what you're doing and what the next step is. And then beyond that, if we don't know it, it'll reveal itself. So, the answer to all this stuff is somewhere between ready, fire, aim and paralysis analysis.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But in that, no matter how much we plan, I try to get them to understand those concepts. You're going to get stuck. So now it's my job as a leader to help you overcome that obstacle, because that's my job now, right?
Sure.
Okay. But the other thing is, don't worry about it. The last thing I'll say on it is what's resonating with me, Doland, is we all tend to get stuck and not take the next step because we're thinking about the fifth next step, and we won't take 1, 2, 3, and 4 because we don't know number 5, right? And I always say, let's not worry about 5 right now. Not that I'm too far ready, fire, aim, right?
Sure.
But it's like 5 will reveal itself when we get to 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Let's just move and get started when you identify those obstacles that come up along the way. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And then some, because I think, Pat, there's this, I think a lot of times leaders I saw a new acronym today I have never seen before. It's FOFU. There's fear of missing out, right? And then there's FOFU, which this is a PG podcast, so I won't explain what the FU stands for.
I was wondering where you were going with that.
I'm going to leave it to people's imagination because I want to keep my PG-13 related. But it's interesting, and I think a lot of leaders get hung up on this idea. When I teach some similar ideas, I call it the 5 lies, but one of them is I need to know everything before I go. I got to be comfortable with all the steps before I go. And part of going is you don't know. It's as simple as going on vacation. If I live in Southern California, if I drive from here to San Francisco, I know what highway I'm going to take, but I don't know if all the areas are open or closed, if there's construction, or if I've got to take a detour, but I know I'm going to get there and I'll find a way to get there. The key thing is get started. Start. You got enough information? Go. Start. Move. So
right.
When you're working with the teams, one of the things that I do want to go back, and I want to talk about your book a little bit, because we're past the time I promised you we would be today, and which I can never keep that original promise, so I just should quit making it. But one of the things that I really like that you said, other than the bumper rails, there's a difference, I think, between a bumper rail and micromanaging. And so when you work with teams around bumper rails, how do you help them differentiate a little bit between, here are the guidelines, and you use the word non-negotiables. And I love the word non-negotiable. Kind of how do you help them understand the difference between here's a bumper rail, so here's the lanes you're in, and not managing them to stay in lane number 3 so that they're going X speed, to get to where they're going?
Great question. Well, I think that's part of the art of implementing and facilitating the 3 C's process, right?
Yeah.
That once you've clarified what your focus is, and once you have clearly identified your outcome,
yeah.
What you start doing is saying, what do we think the obstacles are to that outcome, right? Okay. And then the dialogue just starts moving through. Okay. When you start looking at obstacles, you start saying, okay, what must happen and what cannot happen. Okay. And so right. So if you see that in that, you really end up with, and I hate to put a number on things, but for conversation, you might end up with 4 or 5 must happens, 3 or 4 must nots. And depending on how you word them, your must not may be a must have, right? Just depending on but don't get caught up in the wording. But I mean, if you have 65, I'm going to exaggerate for effect. If you have 100 must haves and cannot happen, you're probably too damn far in the detail, right? So, so I think they'll easily identify themselves, and they're so wide that it leaves so much room for, okay, now how do we get to the desired outcome?
Love that. Yeah.
But here's our highway, right? And one other thing I'll say, and I'll keep this short because I know I'm running you out of time. One of the things I think leaders and we always struggle with is there's that old thing, and it relates to all this, that says our job's not to get into the detail. That's somebody else's job.
Yeah.
And right. And to me, I believe that's somebody that just wants to, and all respect to your audience and to everyone, but that's BS in my opinion. We have to get into the complexity to earn the simple. And our jobs, right, are to make it simple for our team and for everyone else. But in the name of simplicity, we often say that complexity is somebody else's job. Well, how the hell can we make it simple in communication and for our team if we don't at least understand the complexity? So we got to get into complexity to earn the simple. And so I think we start to do that with must happen and cannot happen. Yeah. And that highway, but we're not getting so far into the complexity or let's say into the detail. There's a difference between understanding the complexity and getting into the detail that's somebody else's job.
Right? Yeah. I love that. I love that differentiation. I'm a huge believer in you got to understand the complexity. Doesn't mean you got to be the person doing it. But if you're going to pour cement, you better damn well know how to finish it.
Right.
You got to know.
Because you're going to get stuck. Everybody's going to get stuck. And it's your job to understand what's going on, right, so that you can step in and step out. It also helps you figure out who's most capable of doing something because you understand more about what has to be done, right?
Right. And there's so many things. You build relationships with it. You build trust with it. You build camaraderie. You build all that. You build all that with it. So I want to, let's take a moment. And I told you, there's no eloquent way to get out of a podcast. I haven't, if you ever figure out how to end these things elegantly, send me a note, will you?
I will.
But I want to just take a moment. I want to talk about your book. I have it on my Kindle right here. So I'm going to put it up. And I'm going to read the title, Obstacles to Opportunity, Transforming Business Challenges into Triumphs. And for listeners, at this point in time, if you're watching on YouTube, I just put a picture of the book cover up because you won't be able to see what I just did. So there'll be a picture of the screen on the screen. For those of you who are listening on audio, the link up to Amazon to the book is in the show notes. Go buy the book. Sorry, Pat, I'm probably throw you under the bus right here. Pat offered a free copy of the PDF for you listeners, and my answer was, oh, hell no. There's no value in free. Go buy the book, take action on it, go through it, learn the 3 C's, and read Pat's experiences. I'm into the book. I'm not all the way done with it. I'm in it. So I can't comment yet till I get to the end, and I will when I do. But I know that, just one last question, which is, kind of from your perspective, why did you write the book?
Great question. Obstacles to Opportunities, the title of the book. To me, it means seeing challenges not as roadblocks, but as turning points, right? Mm-hmm. every obstacle carries a seed of growth. The obvious motivational things that everyone says, right? And in business, it's often the signal that you've outgrown the old way of doing things, right? So there's a saying, that someone, and wasn't too long ago, reminded me of, Doland, where it says, a foolish person doesn't learn from their mistakes. A smart person learns from their mistakes, but a wise person learns from someone else's.
Oh,
right?
wow. Yeah.
So let that sit
Great
in,
share.
right? And again, I stole that from somebody, so it's not an original quote. But, so in my own journey, I can look back on my career, and I can't tell you how many people were on that road for me that helped me get unstuck and reduce my learning curve and get from A to B faster.
Sure.
So my goal with the book was, if you look at the book and as you finish it, the book has a lot of stuff of what I learned, but there's also about 22 other people in it. Some I've worked with, some are friends, some people just introduced me to, and they're very successful. They're not some of them are big names, what I would call high profile people, but you know what? They're like people like all of us, that have just struggled and been successful. And I've included them in that book because I wanted to say to readers, if we can help you get from A to B faster, reduce your learning curve, okay, that's what we're trying to do. And I guess the last thing I would say would be, Doland, is I'm really proud of it for many reasons, but this reason, so many people have told me that they take a highlighter, okay, when reading the book. Now, I'm not here pitching books, even though I'd love to sell some, but right, it's to me that met my purpose, right? Because so many things today, we talk about concepts, yes, ideas, but it's about implementation of those ideas, as we said earlier. So I wanted people to be able to get tips and insights that they could immediately take action with. So when people say they're highlighting stuff, that's why I encourage people, go get the book. And if you can't afford it, call me, okay? Because, it's just not that expensive. and anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it, but that's why I wrote the book.
I love that. It is it just again, one, kind of a last thought, as we were coming in, talking kind of about similarities, being both failed retired people. Just the fact that you wrote the book and you're sharing your experiences and the experiences of others to help leaders learn one thing. Try one thing. Just go try one thing. And I always tell readers too, remember, you started to touch on this earlier, we're freaking adults. In school, we had to read from the index, from the table of contents to the appendices in order, right? Because we had to pass the test. In life, as an adult, we don't have to do that. You can pick the book up and you can crack the book open, dog-ear a page. Not that I want them to destroy your book, but I dog-eared the crap out of books all the time. Dog-ear a page, go back to that page, go back and revisit it, and pick the pages that help you the most in the moment when you need it. And guaranteed, the second time you go back, you'll see words you didn't see the first time.
It's like seeing a movie, right? I go to a movie, I walk out, I don't remember it. I remember three things. My wife are ready to shoot me, right? But I'll see that movie 3 times and I see something different all the time, right?
That's right. Exactly. That's why I continue to watch Born Identity. I'm waiting to see if the ending changes. So there, on that note, okay, I'm gonna close this out. I'm gonna just do a couple of things. Very first thing is I close with gratitude again. Said at the beginning, there's a lot of other things you could have been doing with your time other than hanging out with me and cutting up and having a conversation. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I think the insights that you've shared today will help leaders as they're kind of thinking about it. The leaders, go get Pat's book. It'll all be in the show notes, the link and the link to his website. Go visit, look at his content, learn from him. Leaders, stay in the study. Stay in the study. Keep listening. And the last two things are leaders, give the podcast a know, like, share, or follow. Comment in the podcast. It has nothing to do with a vanity number. The podcast takes care of itself, but it helps the podcast be more visible. It helps it with the way the algorithms work. Is it shows up at the top of a list when people are looking for leadership and when they're looking for career or executive advice. Please do that. The second part is, if you know of a leader who's having a challenge or facing a challenge that can learn from what Pat talked about today, share the podcast with them and ask them to listen to it, and listen to it with them again, help them through their challenge. But if we're going to empower 1 million leaders, I can't do it by myself. It takes a community and a family to do that. So let's help each other. Pat's given us some great advice today. With that finally said, thank you, Pat, for being here and just for hanging out. I love the conversation. Great insights. Great insights.
Thank you, Dolan. It's nothing more fun than doing this. So, anytime.
Good to have you. All right. Thank you, sir.